Hi friends, welcome back. So today I want to paint something, but I don't actually have any more canvases. So we're going to do something that I don't do very often, but that I think I'm going to start doing a little bit more, which is I'm going to pick out a painting that I don't like and we're going to gesso over it, and then we're going to paint something new that I do like. Most of the paintings that I have that I'm not super fond of are ones that I did for paint night. Either that's the one that I was using when I was teaching, or it's one that I painted just based off of what they were actually teaching that night. And most of the time they're only okay. They're done in a time crunch. They're not great. So I do have a little pile of those, and I thought it would be fun to show you guys how to start over if you have a painting that you don't like, that you don't want to keep, but that for some reason you're hanging on to. The rule is gesso, and I'll show you how I do it. Let's go. So like I said, this is a canvas that I painted for paint night, and I technically have 2 copies of this, which is why I was very okay with covering one of them up. I painted this earlier this year. I painted the original, and then I believe it was in April I taught it at paint night, so I made this version while I was teaching. And honestly, this version is not as good as the original. I mean, that's kind of what tends to happen, but I just don't really like it, and it's been sitting on the floor of my office since April because I'm not going to hang it. I'm not going to do anything with it. It's just a perfectly fine canvas that's covered with paint that I don't really like. I actually tried to give this painting away and nobody really wanted it, so that's fine. And if I'm being perfectly honest, canvases are so expensive that I haven't wanted to spend the money on any. I'm basically waiting for the company that I get my canvases from to have a canvas sale, and then I'll go ahead and buy a bunch and stock up for the next year or so. But until then, it is the most economical thing I can do to just gesso over some old canvases and make a painting that I actually like. So that's what we're doing here. This is just white acrylic gesso, and I'm not painting the most even layer with this because I'm going to be I'm going to be painting over this, which I will also show you in this video, obviously. But because I'm going to be covering this, I don't feel the need to perfectly cover this in gesso. Sometimes when I'm going to paint over something like this, I don't bother to gesso it, but in this case, what I had on this canvas was a little bit too busy for me to really think about being able to paint something new on it without being distracted by what was already there. So I'm just taking my time. This probably took me 15 or 20 minutes just to gesso over this whole thing. And then gesso takes between a half an hour and an hour to dry, depending on whether it's humid out or not, and depending on how thick of a layer you do. And I had a couple of sections that were really thick, so it took a little bit longer than I really wanted, but that's okay. So I don't know if you can really see it, but I have a basic sketch in place now, and I'm following that while I start to add paint. So obviously now I'm working on the sky, and I had this grandiose idea of making just a soft gradient for the sky, which I don't do very often. I usually like a little bit more movement or clouds or something. And so I had this idea that I would just make this a really smooth, pretty gradient from light blue to a slightly deeper blue. And as you'll see, that doesn't really work out. I'm not crazy fond of the colors that I picked out if I was going to do a gradient, but I will show you what I do to recover from the situation, because I do think that what I ended up with is super pretty, but it's not really what I was going for. So originally I start out by adding darker paint at the bottom and lighter paint at the top, and I'm just using I believe it's a 1/2 inch angle brush, and I'm just doing really smooth side to side strokes and adding water as much as possible to get that super duper smooth. But even doing everything in my power to make it really smooth, you can still see all of the lines for the gradient, and I think that's what was bugging me the most when I was working on this. And it was interesting too, because when I would look at it with my eyes, it didn't look that bad, but then if I looked through the camera viewfinder, my goodness, it looked terrible. So it was really one of those where I think I maybe could have left it, except that then I saw it through the camera and it just didn't look like I wanted it to look. And if it didn't look right through the camera, then it was one that it wouldn't photograph the way that I wanted it to photograph, which would mean that it wouldn't do prints as well as I wanted. So here is where I made the decision to do something different. So I have my fluffy mop brush, and I am adding just a little bit of paint and a little bit of water, and I'm just blending all of those blues together to make it look more like there's wispy clouds, there is some definition in the sky, but it's not heavy clouds, it's not defined clouds, it's not like New Mexico monsoon clouds or anything, but there are clearly clouds in the sky, and it adds some movement and some more dimension and character that I think was really missing when I was trying to just do the gradient. If I'm being perfectly honest, this is the style of sky that I tend to fall back on a lot now, because I really like how it looks, and it's one of those that has just become really simple for me. I have a really easy time picking out what color to go where anymore. So I have to kind of convince myself that just because it's easy doesn't mean it doesn't look good. I do tend to have this notion in the back of my head that if it's too easy, it can't possibly look as good as I think it does. And I really need to work on that. So now I am painting this hill that will be essentially the midground. And I believe I am using a mix of Viridian Green and Ivy Green. I wanted this to be pretty dark for the most part. I don't really want this to draw the eye. I have some really specific ideas for the foreground, so the background is something that I want to almost disappear as much as possible. So for this, I am doing that same blend technique like I was doing with the sky, where I'm just going back and forth with that really smooth, even stroke and trying to make it a little bit more of a gradient. I did pretty routinely add a little bit too much water to my brush, and it kept pulling the paint up a little more than I wanted it to, but I still think it turned out well. And again, this is not supposed to be something that really draws your eye. This is supposed to be very background, very something that you're not really paying attention to. It's there, but I don't want it to be a thing that you necessarily see. I really want the focus to be on the foreground. There are some paintings I've done where I really want you to see the background, and I really want you to look in the distance in the painting and then kind of move forward into the foreground. And this is not one of those. This is one of the, I want you to look at the foreground and slowly make your way to the background, or not. I don't think that you always need to look at the background, like not super intently, I guess is what I mean. You don't always need to scrutinize the background, but you do almost always need to scrutinize the foreground, or not need to, but you almost, your eye kind of wants to. So I wanted to make this painting one that you don't necessarily feel like the background is the thing that you want to focus on. Not that that means either that the background should be bad, but almost I want the background to just kind of melt away, if that makes any sense. It makes sense to me. Hopefully it also makes sense to you. So at this point I had decided again that I didn't really like how the sky looked, so I got some white and I started adding my signature little fluffy clouds, which I really like. I think that really added a lot of detail and dimension and a little bit more character to the background, which I do think is very much needed because, again, I don't want the background to be busy. I don't want the background to be something that's super eye-catching, but I do want the background to fit the rest of the piece. So I do spend a decent amount of time just putting in these clouds, getting them to look exactly like I want. Clouds they're one of those things that is just, it looks like they should be easy and they aren't. I know some artists honestly find them really simple to do, and I am not one of those. Clouds are really, really difficult. I can do stormy clouds relatively easy, but like the happy, fluffy clouds, those are hard. It is really a challenge to get the dimension and the detail and the almost whimsical fluffiness that we get with actual clouds. And I live in New Mexico and we get some of the most beautiful monsoon clouds. And I have been trying for years to figure out how to paint those, and I don't know. I don't know how to do it. One of these days, I'm going to do a video where all I'm going to work on is clouds, where I'm just going to have a bunch of mini canvases just painted blue, and we are going to work on painting clouds. We'll see if I actually do that. I do like how this style of cloud looks by the time I'm done, but it's at about this stage that I always feel like they look bad, which is funny to me because looking at them now on the video as I'm recording this voiceover, they look pretty good. But while I'm working on them, I never think that they look good. I always think they're a mess. They look wrong. They don't look real. They don't look like actual clouds. I think some of that is that I do need to be better about layering them, so I should really do the same thing like I do with background, midground, foreground, but with cloud layers. And I think in this case I was in a little bit of a hurry. I really wanted to get into my foreground area, so I was rushing a little more than I maybe should while I was doing this part of the painting. And I like it. I don't think it looks bad at all. It's not exactly what I had in mind when I started, but I don't in any way think that that's a bad thing. I think that it looks good. And now, at long last, I get started on the foreground. So this is a big tree. This is the base of a tree, really. And I'm starting by just covering it in a mix of, I think it's burnt umber and chocolate. The burnt umber is from Liquitex and chocolate is from Turner Acrylic Gouache, if any of you care what colors and what paints I use. But I have this idea to get a lot of dimension into the tree trunk, but I want to start by having a color there so that I can see where I'm going and see what I'm doing. Sometimes I do find it easier to just put almost a flat color down and then add all of my detail and dimension on top of that. I do have a sketch in place. I'm pretty sure you can't really see it, but there is a sketch to kind of tell me where I'm going with this brown paint and to kind of guide what my plan was. But even so, it is just easier if I have a color down instead of just a sketch, because again, I am going to have to do the rest of the foreground before I can do a whole lot more with the tree. So as soon as I do the next foreground color, which will be the grass that surrounds the tree, I would have unintentionally covered up part of this root, and that would make it much more of a challenge to match the vision that I originally had for this tree trunk. So I find it easier to put a color down. And then I also find that kind of gives me a little bit more freedom when I do start adding in the detail. I can kind of rely on having that dark brown base already there so that I don't have to think about stuff like if I miss a section, then it's just white under there because I gessoed this canvas. So the next thing that I am working on is, of course, the foreground grass, and I think I have dubbed this my grass color of choice for the most part. This is just Viridian green and pale aqua green mixed together. It just gives this very whimsical grass color, and I really like it. I think for the series that I've been working on for a while now, the Fox and the Fairy series, it just fits really well. It suits the fantasy style, it suits the whimsy style, and I'm really digging these colors. I think they look really nice. But like you can see here, I did actually end up covering part of the tree root unintentionally with this green, which again is why I do find it easier to paint in the tree first and then go in with the green and just kind of build it up around the tree trunk. I'm still able to get a match in texture and color on that edge without it being too much of a hassle, because it's not that much detail in a tree root. If I painted a fox, I couldn't easily go in and change the background color around the fox, but with it just being a tree root, this is easier. I spend a lot of time changing the colors and shifting the tones of the grass, and I do this pretty much every time that I use the colors like that for the grass section. I will come back and add more later. I will. But now I'm going to work on my tree. So I am adding some magentas and violets and more of that chocolate brown mixed with a little bit of white to give this tree trunk more dimension and more character. And this I think is where the painting really starts to come alive, just by adding detail and dimension into the tree trunk. And I know that I've sped this up about 300 times, I think. I have it going at 3x speed. So it looks like I'm going really fast. But even if I did this at 1x, when I'm doing a tree like this, I go pretty quickly. I like to paint first and ask questions later, especially when it comes to something like a tree. I find that if I don't put too much thought into it, I get a much more realistic looking tree texture. And I think that's just because my subconscious has a really good idea of what a tree looks like, where my conscious mind has a different idea of what a tree looks like. And honestly, my subconscious is better at it. So I will just go, and I will not really put a whole lot of thought into what color is going where. I just go, and I just kind of let the color and the tone and the brush and my subconscious idea of what a tree looks like guide me. And particularly in this case, this tree looks so good. This tree it's one of the happiest I've been with painting a tree trunk. I think this looks great. So I spend a lot of time kind of just going forward and backward with color there. And then at this point, I have decided that the midground just needs something. The tree in the front is super pretty. The grass in the front, super pretty. The clouds are nice. This hill in the midground is fine. I had intended on adding some detail to that at this point, but instead, we're going to add some more trees. So I have a white pastel pencil that I will use to sketch in trees like this when I've already started a painting. And then I will use a liner brush. And I believe I'm just using burnt umber for the branches. And I just go in and add these simple lines for branches. I will be adding leaves here shortly. But we start with the pastel pencil and the lines for the branches, and this will just help guide me for the leaves. I know that some artists will paint the leaves first and then add the trees, add the branches and the trunks and all of that after. I have never really been good at that, so I do it this way. I find that this just works better for my style and for the style of leaves that I am planning on doing on this painting. I think that this style is just going to work better. So again, I've got out my fluffy brush. This is the same one that I did that sky texture with. And this time it is a dry brush that I have dipped into Turquoise Deep from Liquitex. And I am mixing that with Peacock Blue from Turner Acrylics and with Bright Aqua Green that both brands have, and they're the same color. So I'm starting with the darkest, so I'm starting with Turquoise Deep and a little bit of Peacock Blue, and slowly adding in the turquoise or the Bright Aqua Green, which I think of as turquoise because it's a little closer to the colloquially known color of turquoise. But I'm also going to add these bushes at the bottom, and as you can see, I have added painter's tape along that bottom edge and along the tree because I didn't want to have to redo any of that, but I did want to use this technique for the branches. And I just so happened to have painter's tape in my garage. So this has quickly become one of my favorite ways to do leaves. I used to sponge and it would make a similar texture to this, but not exactly the same. But I just really like how this brush texture comes out. I think it just looks really cool. It looks a little bit more realistic than a sponge texture. And it gets a lot of dimension, especially when you start adding colors and just kind of shifting your tone and you swirl your brush just a little bit. It comes out really, really cute. And it still has that nice whimsy that I was going for. Because again, this piece is going into the Fox and the Fairy series. So it does need to have that level of whimsy that we expect from the Fox and the Fairy. Not that there will be a fox or a fairy in the finished painting, but You know how it is. It still has to go with the series. I think adding these little bushes to the bottom section of the midground really added a lot of detail and dimension as well. It hadn't really occurred to me until I was doing the trees that that would be a good thing to add, but I really like how it looks. I think that came out really nice and a lot better than I anticipated. So like I said, now we're gonna go back and we're gonna shift some of these colors in my green grass again. I think I probably actually did this 3 or 4 times. I know that I cut out a lot of footage of me just going back and forth with the colors here. I thought after a while I was editing the video part of this, I thought it was getting a little bit repetitive. And honestly, it felt repetitive when I was doing it too, but you gotta do what you gotta do. So here I thought I should add a shadow, and then pretty quickly I felt like that was too dark. Yep. See? Thought it was too dark. Immediately going in with a lighter color. And this happens a lot. There's a lot of back and forth, especially with stuff like the grass tones. I think it's similar to with painting the tree. You just have to not think about it so much, and the colors will come out the way that they should. This is one of the things that I have learned through painting so much in the last couple of years. Speaking of, I actually think it's really funny because I did that video a few weeks ago of all of my paintings for this year. By the time that video came out, I had actually finished this painting, a painting of a snail, and am halfway through another painting. So I really have no reason to feel like I haven't painted this year. I've painted a lot. Oh, I did another bird. That's what it was. I did a hummingbird. Oh, it's raining. Well, that's nice. I do need rain. It has been very hot out here. At the time of recording, it's been in the hundreds. Rain will be quite nice. Back to the video. Here I am just adding some vines to the tree. I haven't ever done this before, but I also haven't really done a super close-up on a tree trunk like this. So just an idea that popped into my head at the moment was, what if we put some vines on this thing? And I really like it. It was really fun to kind of figure out the placement of the vines on the texture of the tree. I think it came out really cute. Definitely a detail that I will keep in my back pocket for future paintings because I do think it came out really nice. Probably the tree itself is the thing that I ended up spending the most time on because I will add more detail to it here pretty soon. I have a fondness of trees for paintings, and I'm pretty sure I've talked about this before. I just really like them. I think they're really fun to paint. They're really unique. They always look different from one another, and I think that's really nice. I think that makes them a really fun thing to paint. My mother does not like painting trees, and I think it's so funny. So I have made it a little bit of my signature that I have this vibrant green moss that grows on the trees in this world. And I did want to make sure that no matter what, this tree had that moss because I make sure that it's on all of the trees. This is a super common thing in this world, is that the trees have this moss. I think it's one of those things that it centers the paintings a little bit. It makes them so that you have more of a direct idea that yes, these are in the same world, because even if the trees aren't the same type, they all have this same moss. So I use a couple of different greens and I just mix them together, and I just mix them on the canvas. I don't do any mixing on my palette. I will just go into one color and then the other color and just add it directly onto the canvas. I do not remember off the top of my head what the shades are that I use, so I can't tell you. But I really like them. I think one of them is some kind of pale green, but I don't remember exactly what it's called. This part did actually take me a little while. I actually had to check while I was editing because it looked like I was painting really slowly again, but I sped everything up 3x. No, I'm actually painting super slow. So me going slow here, this is 3x. This is my super slow moss adding. And I think because at this point, this is almost a finishing touch on the tree, so I need to make sure that I get it exactly how I want it and it doesn't look funky, because if it looks funky, I'm gonna either have to redo a section of the tree or I'm gonna have to find something else to cover that portion of the tree, which I could do. I could add another little plant in the front here, but ideally with what I had in my head, I didn't want to have to do that. So now one of the last things that I'm going to do before we finish off this video is I'm going to add some grass details. I do paint a character on this canvas, but I am not going to show you my actual painting of it. I will, though there is a clip of what the finished product looks like at the end of this video, but I had never painted this little critter before, so I didn't want to try to do it on camera. That was a little too much pressure for me at the moment. So instead you get to see the whole background. And when I get to this point, I try to make sure that I do add grasses, and I do, again, kind of just add those details that really ground the painting in with the rest of the series, because all of them have little tufts of grass in the like, because I'll do an almost glassy sheet of grass, and then I just add sprigs of little blades of grass that are very particularly painted so that you can see and your eye will tell you that yes, this is grass, because look, there's blades of grass right there. So I always spend a little bit of time nearer the end of a painting to go in and add grass details. And I added them really, really small for some reason. And I didn't really realize it until the day after I did these little grass details that they were way too small. Because with how close you are to the tree, the blades of grass should be a lot longer than that. So here is a couple of days later when I recognized that my grass was too short. And I've come back to add some longer blades of grass that really help to show you the scale of things, because that tree should seem really big. This is like a quarter of the tree trunk. This is not even half of the tree trunk. And that should tell you, or at least give you a hint, of the size of the little critter that I will be painting in the foreground, off camera. I do really like how the blades of grass did eventually come out. Trying to do larger blades of grass has always been a little bit of a challenge for me, but I think they still came out really nice. I am still working on dimension with blades of grass, so getting that little curved bend when, you know, like a blade of grass gets really long and it kind of flops over. From a distance, it kind of looks thick and then super thin and then thick again. I am still working on getting that texture down, but I feel like I'm close, and I think that this painting is a decent representation of little blades of grass. So I probably spent like 15-20 minutes just adding these little blades of grass and getting ready for my little foreground figure. And I'll tell you now, it's a little field mouse. One of my friends had suggested that I try painting a field mouse, and I hadn't ever really considered it before. I had been looking for other critters that I could add to the series, but I don't know, a mouse hadn't ever occurred to me. So, in this painting, I finally tried a new animal. It came out really cute. You'll get to see it in a couple of minutes here. It's real cute. But I think that the amount of time and the amount of detail that I put into the rest of the canvas really does my little mouse justice. I do really love putting a lot of time and a lot of attention into the background, even when the thing that I really want you to see is the little character in the front. The thing that I want your eyes to focus on is the little mouse that's going to be right in the front. He's the thing that I want you to see the most, the thing that I want your eyes to go to immediately, and then they can travel through the rest of the background and you can see all of the little details that are everywhere else that make his little home. But the important part is the mouse. And I just think it's really, really fun to put a lot of time and a lot of detail and a lot of effort into a super pretty, super cute background that just makes the most perfect home for a tiny little mouse. And I really hope that you guys have enjoyed watching me paint this background and hearing me talk about the process a little bit. I am a little strapped for ideas at the moment, so if you guys have anything that you would like to see more of, or have anything that you would like to know more about with my paintings, please let me know in the comments and I will make that a priority for one of the upcoming videos. And without further ado, here he is, ladies and gentlemen. One little mouse. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in a couple weeks with a whole new video. Bye!